Hey everybody, it's Sean from Western Star Art and Wear. Hey, I was going to do something a little different today. I am going to read another chapter of my dad's book. I posted one earlier today and I was going to read one live. Hopefully this doesn't go sideways with me. I tend to stumble on my words when I'm doing it pre-recorded, so this will be something. Anyway, I was going to tell you that I've added 2 new shirts. Here's one of them. Let me step back. It's kind of got like a paint dip splatter on the sleeves and the bottom, and then the skull print. And these are Gildan, and this one is a short sleeve, is a medium. And then I've got another one that's a little bit like that, that is, let's see if I can, dipped sleeves. The kids are all about this these days. And the cow's skull. Anyway, this one is a Gildan, and it's a large in both of these. Hi, Kathy. They're both a heavy cotton, so if you are interested in buying these, you want to make sure and realize it's probably going to shrink. I have washed them, though. I don't think they shrink too much, which I'm kind of surprised. Maybe they were pre-shrunk when we got them, but anyway. This one is a large, and the other one is a medium. Anyway, I was going to make another change. I'm going to change the page on Facebook to Western Star Country Living, and I'm going to still keep the page where if you want to buy anything, it'll still be Western Star Art and Wear, but I'm doing more of on the page, more of the living and stuff like that, and I just think it makes more sense. So I was going to change that, and those will probably happen in a day or so. Anyway, I'm getting ready to read. I think this one is chapter 26 now of this book, if you're following along. And no wait, 25. Hold on, sorry guys. I could have sworn maybe. Let me check here just a minute. There's got to be. Hold on, of course. I don't see what's going on. Oh my goodness, why does this always happen when you go live? I'm pretty sure that I thought I had done. Okay, nope, it is 25. So I just read 24 earlier today and posted it, and so this is going to be chapter 25. So I'm going to start. Hopefully I don't mess up too much. Okay, we went by Hassan's store where we used to buy our groceries when we first moved to town, across the railroad tracks and up Depot Street. There was a railroad station where I had shined many shoes and sold papers for Shin Green and myself. In the city, we passed the bank where we used to shoot cigarette butts as the men came out and throwed them away, and where we used to put gum on a stick and fish out change that fell into the drains across town by Mr. Dixon's shoe shop. He was Hezekiah's pa. Then on by the high school, where I never got to, and out into the country where Sweetnin and me had come into town on the carryall. After that, I sort of laid back and looked up at the sky and wondered what was to come next in my young life. The old truck was a-chugging along and making good time. We pulled into the farm about 11 o'clock, and the first thing that I did was to look for a place to put my settin' hen and her eggs. Jamie and William was studying how to best unload the stuff that we had brought from Roxborough. I found a chicken house with some nest and put the eggs in it, and I brought her and put her on the eggs. I brought the hen out. I thought she would fly off, but she settled right in like it had been her nest all along. I went to the well and drew some water and poured it in a trough that had been there before we got there. I then went up to the house and helped the men unload and carry what they told me to carry. We soon unloaded, and Jamie said that he had to haul something else for one of his people, and he left. There was William and me to look over where we was. This is a long ways from where we was, I said to William, and he said it was the God's truth in a nutshell. I went up to the barn and found some corn and wheat in a bin and got some of it and took it down to the little old hen. She gobbled it up and nothing flat. I took her some water and she drank that too. She never left the nest, though. She stood her ground. She later hatched out 11 chicks out of 12 eggs that she had sat on. I moved her in a box and the eggs in another. Yes, sir, that was some little old hen, and she lived for many years and laid good eggs and hatched many of the chicks before the hawk caught her and made off with her. William and I never had too much in common, and I set out to explore for myself what the place that was going to be my home for a little while. William was taking a nap, on one of the mattresses that we had moved. I started out with the barn. There was 6 stalls and a hay loft and troughs to feed the animals that you could throw down the hay from the loft in the milking stalls, a corn shelter and a corn stalk cutter for the stalls, a corral outside of the barn that the stock could run in over the weekends when they didn't have to work, which weren't many days. Horses and mules in those days had to work and work hard for their eating. A lot of curry combs and brushes hung on the walls, and an old collar that didn't seem to be any good just a hanging there. A few cultivators, hoes, and used plow points was about the size of the barn. There was another building that had 2 stories. It had been used for animals that stayed in the pasture most of their lives, like the goats and sheep and cattle, and maybe a hog or 2. There was a mixing box to mix the feed in for them. I went up in the top, and someone had been using it for a bedroom. There was a dresser and a few old things that someone had used before our time. Next, I went down to the pack house. That's where you pack the tobacco when it's cured and waited for it to be grated and took to market. They have always had a northern light, so you could grade the tobacco without a glare on it. And then the family ties it up. I went next to the tobacco barns where you cure the tobacco before you take it to the pack house. Hi, Sharon. Hi, Mary. I hope I'm not stumbling too much. I'm getting nervous. They have flues in them with pipes are running all around the bottom, so you can get her hot in the final stages. We had all this stuff when I was under 5 years old, and I knew all about it from Pa and Sweetnin and the rest of the family that helped teach me over the years. There were some bats living there. They're hanging upside down by their feet with their heads pointed down. They always liked some place dark, and they sure had it there. Next was a little old house that someone had lived in. There were 2 rooms, and a lot of the stuff was left in the house, a stove and a bed and a dresser and such. I didn't mess around it because I didn't know what would be the rules when Pa took over the place. Knowing Pa, he always had his own ways and with not much interference from no one. I think that was where Jamie was going for a shock for sure. I walked back out to the road and saw a cloud of dust coming down the road. It was the family with Uncle William and the other feller that had Jamie Lewis's car. Both of them were loaded. They barreled by me and a blowing the horn and a hollering out as they went by. I followed them on down to the house and waited for what they had a mind for me to do. Ma commences as soon as she got off the car to holler and to get things a-going. Lord of mercy, I'm glad to be out of that Sodom and Gomorrah and back into the land of milk and honey. I can smell this there that hain't been used yet, and you've a lot of room to cuss a cat if'n you want. Now I want all of you to gather around, and I want to say a word to the Lord and thank him for delivering us out of the city of sin. That's why all of them people done gone broke in the marketplace, whatever that is. Anyways, they was a sinning, and that's why they no longer have any money and are jumping out of the windows and such. Lord, Ma shouted, I come afore you here and now, and I want to thank you for bringing me and mine and my old man out here in this country. As sure as the water was parted for Moses, the way was showed for us to come back to the country, and I know that nothing can be had without you, so I want you to lead us in the way of the light. I know that Tom ain't much, a fooling around all the time and a taking of the strong drink, but I hope that he can see his way clear to do better now. But I know that he is going to need your help, and all these young'uns. I want you to help us, and they'll pay you back being better people and a following in your way. Now I'll leave you alone for a while. You done your part. In the name of the Father, amen. All of us got up and shook the dirt off of our knees. Now I got to get supper started here and now, Ma Lowe's. And the first thing that I want is the stove put up and a burning with meat and taters on it. Skeeter, you hustle me up some stove wood someplace, and when the stove is lit up, I'll commence. The main house was off from the kitchen, which was a 3-room shack with a cooking place area, dining room, and an attic. The stove was put up in a little room leading off the dining room where there was a table. Our table had benches instead of chairs because there were so many of us. Pa and Ma sat on each end. They had chairs and the rest of us had benches. I went out and scouted around and looked for some stove wood when I came up on this old wood pile that had some chips. There was an old log chewed away with many choppings, but the chips looked dry and seemed like they would burn all right. I gathered up an armful and took them into the kitchen to Ma. "Well, now," she lows, "I ain't used chips for fire in a long time. If this is pine, we'll have some brown bread tonight." I left her a-singing in a hymn and getting the stuff ready for our supper. Ma was sure happy to be back on the farm. I went down to an old garden place, and there was some multiplying onions that had been planted before. Someone had planted them and left before they got up to any size, probably put them out in February. I took a bunch to the kitchen to Ma. "We'll plant us a big garden with yellow wax beans and Valentine green beans, ash taters and sweet taters and all the good stuff. You just wait and see. With all that hoss manure and stuff a-going to put under them, we'll have a fine garden." I load as much and went outside to wait on the victuals. All the others were tearing around all over the place, staking hold on the place that was to be theirs for the next few. I guessed that I would be a-bedding down with William upstairs. They hadn't told me that yet. Pa was a-checking out the well and seeing how much water it provide for the shack and household and the stock. It tasted pretty good, only it had a lot of lime in it. Pretty soon Ma hollered for us to come to supper. Nanny was setting the table and Pearl was a-helping. We all gathered around and waited for Pa to say the blessing. Pa pretty much said the same thing all the time, no matter what it was. He said, "Thank God for supper." We turned our plates over and waited to be served. Ma had fried taters, fat meat, and leftover pintos for supper, and the onions that I had brung in. We also had some tub butter that we had gotten in town, and we spread it on the biscuits, and they were really good out in that country air. She hadn't gotten hot yet, and things were real nice in the spring. I couldn't have imagined the work that was laid ahead of me. I went to sleep that night with the whippoorwills a-hollering like they did when I was back a ways. I had a bed upstairs with William, and we got on pretty good. It was a long house. The second floor had never been finished. The floor was the only thing that was finished, and it was slick, but there wasn't any partitions in it at all, so it was a long room all the way across the house, full of beds, and they were full of people. Pa and Ma lived downstairs, and that was all they had, a living room and a bed by the fireplace for them. We all sat up when we had a chance by the fire for the little and then we would turn in. Each night one of them would tell of something that happened to them in the past. You'd think I'd know this better because I read this before I come on, but here we go. Some of it was good and some of them didn't get too far, but we always told the teller that he or she was good at telling the story. One night Ma told the story of Barbara Allen, or the song. Seems that this gal Barbara Allen had a fella and she was sure hot for him, but her pa was dead set against carrying on by his gal with the fella that was a gal chaser and what have you. Ma scraped and coughed and sneezed a time or two, and then she got all cleared up and commenced to tellin'. I remember some of it till this day. It goes like this. This young man, do you remember the night when we was at the wedding? You waited on the pretty gals there, and Barbara Allen was slighted. It seems like this fella got sick after she give him the air, and some of it went like this. She followed him up and she followed him down. She followed him to his grave. And there she dropped on a bended knee. She wept and moaned and prayed. Seems her pa said, oh daughter, what makes you weep? So there is more young fellers than George." That being the fellow's name, and she was answering him, saying, oh father, George had my heart, and now he's dead and gone." Then there was a part that had a bit more that I remembered. There was this vine a-growing outside of the church, and it grew till it reached the top of the church, and it linked and tied in a lover's knot. It couldn't grow no higher. So I guess that the feller died, and Barbara died too, and the vine represented them. Now all of you, I want you to remember that a lot of things can kill you, and a broken heart is one of them. And Ma eyed Pa right straight on, and Pa didn't say anything, just scraped and spit in the fire. After that, we all told Ma that was a good story, and she did a good job of telling it to all of us. Then we all said goodnight and went off to our beds in the attic. The next morning, Pa was up and at 'em early. Ma was in the kitchen beating the stovepipe and singing hymns. Yes, sir, things was a-poppin' all over the farm. We didn't have any stock yet, but I went out to the barn and got my chickens some feed from the box of leftover corn and stuff. The chickens liked it. They had taken to the house and was a-roosting really well. I had an old black giant rooster that was crippled, but he could still mount the hens, and he did really well. In fact, I had 7 or 8 hens, and he did them both a number of times a day. He sort of walked sideways, but he got the job done. I got them some water from the well, and they took right to it. We didn't have them shut up yet because they weren't no garden or anything for them to get into or hurt. And they was having a blast with all that freedom. There was some tall pines in the back of us, and they loved to go in the woods and scratch and find bugs and such. They sure gave real good eggs, too. That morning, we had some fried taters with daub and fat meat and biscuits. I was hungry and torn to my share. Sweeten had stayed in town, so it was just William, Pa, Ma, and me. Soon as breakfast was over, Pa got out his axe, and there was a grinding stone left by the former tenants. It didn't have a water box under it, and we had to pour water on it while Pa sharpened his axe. First William and then I turned the rock, and Pa did the sharpening. When he had a razor sharp, we took off for the woods. Now, boys, we have to get some dead cedar for the stove for your Ma. She loved to cook with dry cedar, and most farms has quite a bit of it on it. We went down into the woods and started to look. There was wood thrush, catbirds, brown thrush, and woodpeckers all over the place, a few chickadees and a titmouse, and now and then a sapsucker. Pa finally found the tree that he was looking for and commenced to clean out around the trees. Now I want you boys to pay attention. Afore you cut a tree, you always get the little stuff out of the way so as it won't bother your axe when you're swinging. He had just one axe, so me and Will looked on. Now when I get this tree felled, I want you all to pile this brush in a neat pile. That way it'll make a place for the birds and rabbits to stay in and out of the way of predators and raise their family. Then we'll have more game in the winter to eat and such. Paul started his cut on the left side. He went up and got a chip and brought it down and then cut it off flat at the stump. Then he went on the other side and did the same thing, only this time he was cutting right-handed. Now the reason for that is I want my stump to be low and flat. So and if I have to drive my wagon through this woods, I'll have a clearing under her. Because we won't have a wagon yet, but they tell me it'll be here in a day or two. What we have to do now is get the necessary things to survive on. Now the tree came crashing to the ground, and a lot of the debris fell all around it. Pa took his axe and trimmed all the limbs off and told us boys to pile them around in a neat pile. So we did that. Anyone who had a stick of wood on it, Pa cut it off and piled it in the stack. Then he measured 2 stove wood lengths and started to chop the log in 2. He started on each side and said that you figure out how much cut it would take to cut off the log. It was about 12 inches long, and he took a cut of 6 inches on either side and dropped the log. He told us to pick up the chips and we would take them to the house to start fires in the kitchen stove. There are some bags up at the barn, so Skeeter, you run up there and get some to carry the chips home. If it ain't far, and you're young and you need to run, so I took off at a dog trot and covered the distance in no time at all. There was guano bags and smelled of fertilizer, but I got 2 and took them back to Pa. When I got back, he said that I had done a good job and had not dawdled on the way. No siree, I picked them up and laid them down. Well, that's the way to do it when there's a job to do. Grab right onto it and get her done. William and me picked up the chips and put them in the bag. There were a lot more, and we had a bag full apiece when we went home that night. After Pa cut off the logs, he went and found a dogwood tree and made a glut out of it, which was a kind of a wedge. He hit the end of the log with his axe, and it started to crack. He stuck the glut in the crack and pulled out his axe, and the glut held the log open. Now, when we get some axes and a maul, we can do the job better. But right now, we have only one axe, and this is how you do her. He hit the glut several times with the head of his axe, and the crack spread wide. Then he went up to the other end and came down hard in the crack, and the log fell open, all but a few splinters, which he cut out. It was pretty red wood with a white outer part. Pa says, "Dang me, if that hain't sheer and limber, I hain't ever seen none." Then Pa split all of the tree in long pieces about the size of watermelon slices. This laid up on the stump and cut it at an angle, which I later learned to do, and it was great to know that you could take a dead tree and make it into something that we had to use every day to cook our food. Pa says that we'll haul some of this to the house and come back later with the wagon and haul it on the wagon that we are supposed to get from the owner. Pa took a grapevine or something to that effect and wrapped it around a lot of the wood for the stove, then got his arms in it and got it on his back. William and I shouldered up our sacks of chips, and we all started for the house. We took it all to the house and put it at the back door of the kitchen, and Ma comes out and got some of the chips. "Well, sir, if you hain't all been a-getting on with the work, I don't know what has. This is the best stove wood that a woman can have, and it cooks anything that you can come up with. Y'all have done a fine job today. Supper will be done directly, and I know you're all hungry after all that work. Now, if in that ain't the trick itself, all I have to do now is just reach in and get the wood." We filled it up with the wood and the chips. Ma had found some dried peas, and the girls had cut some creasy salad, and we had some cornbread. Some ladies up the road had brought Ma a pat of butter and a piece of ham meat that she was planning to have for breakfast, the ham, that is. We ate some of the butter and the creasy salad and peas for dinner. Now, you never hear of a body a-giving you anything in the Sodom and Gomorrah city. They're too busy a-doing it to one another. Now, y'all take the farm and its people, they divide with the less fortunate like us. That Nanny Bastley up the road a piece, she seems a nice person, and she comes to make us welcome. There's a Oliver feller that lives around here, and he'll be over to welcome us too, 'cause he was some kind of kin to my folks back there when we milled for a living. Marster Macy, the fella that Ma married after my pa had died, he was a fella from the Civil War, a veteran or something like that. We ground grain into flour and corn into meal, that sort of thing. That night after supper, Ma tells us about Marster Macy. Now, my mammy was a high-spirited woman and didn't want to be without a man very long. That's why she married this Macy feller, or Macy. And she had several young'uns by him. To get back to my story, we lived up on a hill kind of away from the mill, which was down by the mill pond, since the water power made it go around and grind the grain. He had 100 or 2 of chickens, all black, and they laid a lot of eggs. But you know, we never got any of them eggs. They were sold for 10 or 12 cents a dozen, and Marster Macy pocketed the money. Us being someone else's young'uns, we come on hard. I am here to tell you, they was Sid, and he was the oldest, and then me, Lily, and Billy. He was the youngest, 'cause he didn't wait very long till he got Ma in the family way, but she had to work right on till she had the babies. Bratcher, then Macy, had a stroke and couldn't walk a step, so he slid on the floor where he wanted to go. He was a mean feller. I'm here to tell you that he made life hell for all of us, and he ordered up a gallon of liquor every week, and the mailman brought it regular as a clock. Old Macy was always in that jug and a-sliding around. Let me tell you, kids, right here and now, stepchildren have a hard road to travel, and don't you ever forget it. One night we was all fixed to go to bed, and Billy had been sleeping with Marster Macy since he was small and the bed was scarce. Now Billy commenced to crying, and Sid spoke up and asked him why he was crying. "Mr. Macy holds my feet between his legs all night, and it hurts something fierce." "Well, now you come on up in bed with me," Sid says. "Nah, you ain't going to take him away from my bed," says Macy. "He kicks, and I have to control him, so I put his feet between my legs." "Well, old man, I'm going to take him to bed with me, and if that don't set, then I'll wring your neck with this horse collar a-hanging here." So Mr. Macy shuts up and went to bed by himself. Now, Ma was a fine woman, and that's all there was to it, and she was nursing her baby, but there was a fine fella looking to come to the mill regular even when there was no grain to grind. One day I went down to see about getting the meal for supper, and I caught Ma and this fella. Ma comes after me and tells me not to tell Macy on her. He'll never be up, and he's on his last leg, so you see what I'm up against. Well, sir, I never told Master Macy on her, but some say that Annie Macy was the fella's young'un. Well, I know for sure was Mr. Macy died soon after he come down in the legs and all that liquor, and him not being able to get around, he just up and dies with another stroke. Right after that, your pa and me married, and I left home, so I don't know how the rest come out. So we all went off to bed and got some needed sleep. I was sure tired and went off soon as I hit the bed. The next day we all got up at the crack of dawn, or the first cock crow or whatever. It was plenty early. Ma had hot bread and coffee and some pear preserves, so we got off to a good start. They brought the mules and the milk cow over that morning and some feed for them on a long bedded wagon. A black eye brought them, and not Jamie Lewis. It works for Mr. Jamie Helo's. Eyes work for Mr. Jamie Helo's, and my name be Leonard Rice, and the mules' names be Tom and Billy. The big white is Tom, and dapple gray is Billy. They're both real good animals and won't give any trouble. Old Tom has been around for a spell, but the young one is only about 6, but plumb gentle. The cow's part Jersey and part Guernsey, and she gives about 3 to 4 gallons a day when she's fresh. She's going to have a calf sometime in the fall. This feed where you want me to put it. Soon I unloaded. I'm going to walk back to the place. It's just back up the road a piece. All right, Pa says. And Leonard, I thank you for the information on the stock. We'll take good care of them and treat them as I would my own. I'll tell Mass Jamie, says Leonard. Well, unload the feed and you can be making your way on back and if you want. I's much obliged, Leonard says, and gives Pa the lines and starts walking back to the house of the Bratchards. Pa pulls the mules up into the barn and we unload the feed. Since these mules is already hooked up, we just as well get some work up, Skeeter. You go and fetch your Ma and see where she wants this cow. Ma comes up and looks over the cow and rubs her head. Ma eyes her and says she'll give about 3 gallons and a half with a pound of butter a day if she is fed well and turned into the pasture. I want you to bring her over here to the garage in the barn that leads out into the pasture. There's a concrete place over there for milking and a place for feed and a stool for milking. So when I finish milking, I can just turn her into the pasture. So Ma took the old Sookie over to the pasture after she tied her up and milked out about a gallon of milk. She let the cow out in the pasture. Pa, William, and me got the axe and went off to the woods with the team and the wagon. And that is the end of that chapter, and I hope I didn't mess it up too much. I hope you guys are having a good day or getting ready to be evening soon. I'm thinking about what I'm going to make for dinner. Anyway, I hope that the live wasn't too bad. It's pretty nerve-wracking to know people are watching you. I mean, you know people watch it when I do a pre-recording, but they're not like right there. So anyway, I will talk to you guys later, and I hope you have a great evening, and I hope you enjoyed it. God bless.